All right. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, well, it's a little after the 6 o'clock hour, and hopefully a few more people will be joining us during the night as they get free. And I'll go ahead. Let's get it started here. Okay, so everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope that as the evening progresses, you will feel like us, that this conversation and this sharing among one another is one way that we can create collectively a more just and equitable world. We deeply appreciate the time and contributions of our presenters this evening, Katy Bresette, Jerry Jondreau, and Antonio Cosme. They will introduce themselves shortly. We'd like to also acknowledge some others that have helped us bring this evening together. Sharing this evening tonight, we have, as she introduced herself, Tafira Rushdan, the waiting room doorkeeper. We have myself, Chris Jackson, so gathering space host, chat box monitor. Natalie Ramos will also be in the chat box monitoring. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box and we will try and make sure we get those questions to the presenters so they can be answered. All right. So we have Jakara Jackson on Detroit camera. We have Kelsey Hartman, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community camera, and then Garrett Dempsey on the Zoom logistics. Our supporting groups are Dynamite Hills Farms, Southwest Grows, National Wildlife Federation, Detroit Outdoors, Sierra Club, Keep Growing Detroit, YMCA of Metro Detroit, and Detroit Parks and Recreation Department. This series of gatherings and cultural exchanges has received primary funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in an effort to promote healthy communities. A couple of notes to share with everyone before we giving our attention to our presenters. We will keep attendees muted during most of this presentation, but again, we do encourage you to use the chat box. This evening is being recorded so that more people can benefit from this evening. So please mute your camera if you do not want your image shared and contact us if you have any concerns. Lastly, one note about time and our scheduling this evening. We don't know exactly when our sugar making process will conclude this evening. Tapping maple trees, making maple syrup, and making maple sugar is a process that forces us to be flexible and to respond to conditions that we cannot control. So we ask for your patience with us this evening while we know the personal stories we will share and the time those will take. There is still a degree of uncertainty with the cooking process we are demonstrating tonight. We hope that you can stay with us for the entirety, but please feel okay about logging out when you must, and you can always log back in. And remember that we are recording this, and this will be made available in the upcoming weeks. All right, so with that being said, I would like to hand the mic over to Antonio Cosme. And Antonio. All right, we got your mic off now.
Hey, everybody. So I'm speaking from the computer. I'll mute this one. So I'm going to be talking from Jakara's phone. Hi, my name is Antonio Cosme. I'm a co-Wawiltecan Boricua from Southwest Detroit. And we are in my kitchen at Southwest Grows, which is like an urban farm and also agroecology center. Yeah, and welcome to my kitchen. Like, I wish you could see the other side. There's all these lights. It's pretty intense. But I'm in the midst of like mixing this maple syrup and trying to turn it into maple sugar. And we are doing it like old school style, like by hand. And it's incredibly labor intensive. But yeah, I'll kick it over to Jerry and KT because I'm like sweaty and all my focus is on this sugar.
All right, thank you, Antonio. Let's see, Jerry or Katy. Okay, Katy, you're muted, and Jerry, you're muted too.
Go ahead and have Jerry.
All right. And let's see if I can unmute.
Jerry dropped.
All right.
There it goes.
And for those,
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to be quick about this. I'm actually down in New Mexico right now. We're on a fire assignment. So I apologize for the craziness, but I definitely didn't want to miss this. So I'll try to participate as often as I can. I might lose service. We're driving through beautiful New Mexico at the moment. But Buju, Antonio we Quaidong Dojabano Jukwe Shnabe in Indian Dao. So my name is Jerry Jondreau. The owner operator from Dynamite Hills along with Katy. Also a firefighter, a wildland firefighter, obviously. And I come from a long line of sugar makers. Our farm is actually on the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community's reservation in the Western Upper Peninsula, which is still has some of the most dense sugar maple stands in the world. And so there's a lot of history related to sugaring from that particular area. That's hopefully what we'll be able to share with you today is some of those stories, some of that history, kind of the process behind it, maybe some of the connections to the importance of doing those things, the historical economies, the trade routes, all those good things, and how we're really, at our family and our operation, we're trying to reclaim some of those things. So we really appreciate this opportunity to share with everyone there, and everyone's work on trying to pull this thing together. And I'll leave it at that, and hopefully Katy's available to share her introduction as well, which
All right, and for those of you in the chat, Katy is actually on the screen labeled as Jerry, just so that doesn't confuse you.
All right. Bonjour, can everyone hear me and see me?
Ooh, yes.
Okay. So, Mangi dote, Miss Quabikong Donjiba, Makuntaban, Nimbaba, and Nishnabi, and Nakaziban, Ninsa, Zibuniki, and Dashnakas. Ewa de ma wenjibayan, ma Miss Quabikong, me and Gojinasa, Ejinagua, Kuma Akia, Uma, we quedunk. Me Nguji Bejeguank, me so Oma Nishnabi, King, me wenjibank. In tanong kiyote, ingi tanong kiyote ma wenjibayan, in dudapan na kina anujago gago na nishnabe moin nago nishnabe in nadiziwen mi ajinaka de ganyo. Giwin de munin imbaba jitun no nishnabe moin ginawa danundamek ejitago ziwag. Ingo Ojibwe or Ojibwewak. Miso oga kidowa dwinawa aya gmeoja ko minawa nungum gi kidowag apitin dagwak da abajtunino nishinabe moin. Api nundemeke o nishinabe moin misa api ge ani nisidotame ginwa yang me ge enadisianka gaye. So Bujugakina, hello everyone. That I was giving you just some sounds of Ojibwe and Nishnabemwen And I'll go in a little bit more detail because I'm sitting still quietly in my kitchen. I'm not driving in my truck or working real hard like that sweaty guy. So I have a little bit of time to share some words with you and to kind of help you maybe understand a little bit of where we're coming from and that background. So I'll start just by introducing myself. A long time ago, they say that introductions, we use those to give you all context, right? To help you understand. The words that I say only come from the place that I am coming from, right? And so I can only give you what it is I was gifted. And so part of the way we introduce ourselves is we give you our clan names, where we're from, and our family names. Those are really, really important, right? So a long time ago, you would understand quite a bit about a person just by that small piece of introduction. So I know Jerry shared with you that he's Crane Clan. I'm a Loon Clan member. Both of us being Bird Clan members, it's really important to understand that those were people who were asked to speak, right, to help share the words of the people. And so that gives you a piece, right, that gives you an understanding, just a small understanding of what does that mean when someone from these clans comes forward and shares those words with you. These are words that were gifted to us, right, from our elders and from our ancestors, from our families, and all of that word, all of those processes, all of those things really help you to understand a little bit more, right, about a person. The second thing that I always share with someone is where I'm from. That's that next layer, that next level. So me, I'm from the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. I live here in QNB with Jerry, like he had said, helping operate on Dynamite Hill Farms here. We're really lucky. We have acres here that we can spend time on getting back to understanding what it means to be from this land. A lot of us, I think even on this conversation, are really working to get back to that place. And so much of what our work and what we're doing is trying to find ourselves again in this land. And what I shared with you when I spoke Ojibwe, I was telling you these words come from Anishinaabe or King. That's what we call. A lot of people say like Ojibwe country, you know. And part of understanding what that means is that even though I might be a Red Cliff Band member, I have family lines and lineage coming from this place specifically, and many of the other reservations and locations across Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan area up through Canada. And so a lot of my knowledge, a lot of the background that I've been gifted comes from those elders, from those speakers, from those people. Makuntiban, that was the name of my father, and he was the one who taught me long ago how to use my words and how important they were. And so I not only did I take his clan name and his clan representative, I also took a lot of his gifts, and part of his gifts were the ability and the responsibility to speak and to use those words in the best way possible. And then lastly, I gave you my own personal name. I was taught by my father, all of these other things are much more important, right? Like my clan and who I come from, those brothers and sisters tell you a bit about me. Where I come from, being someone who is from Lake Superior, living on the shorelines, and then a traveler myself, right? My family, we traveled quite a bit. All of those things are more important. And then lastly on that is just me, little me, Zigunikwe. It translates to spring, or a spring woman is what, like the literal translation. And again, those names, that's to give you an understanding of me, who I am, my helpers, and the people who have brought me to this place. And so then me physically, Katy, you know, I'm just even smaller than all of those pieces all tied together. So part of what we were really interested in sharing this with you and sharing this conversation and showing you how we make those men sweat. Look at that Antonio over there working over there, just working in his sweating away. Part of what we're showing and sharing with you is what that means, right? So not only do we have these beautiful words, but we have also then what comes from that, these wonderful foods, that are a gift to our people and our folks here, but then to all of us who are spending our time on this land. And we're hoping in sharing these stories with you, we're able to help you all kind of recognize your own connections to this place and what it means to be, not only as me as an Anishinaabe woman from this place, but for you all too. What does that mean for you to be someone who now lives and resides and is from a place that's so powerful and wonderful? So part of what we'd like to share with you is some of that history, right? So some of the things, and then Jerry, if you need to jump in, feel free if you're able to. Part of the first part of our story, we talk about being Ojibwe and this being Ojibwe country, and we're a little biased, right? Because we're Ojibwe and we find ourselves quite amazing. So we enjoy the fact that we are able to speak from these beautiful and wonderful homelands of ours. But we have an older story, and part of the story of sugar and sugar making comes from that longer story that goes further and further back. Some of our oldest Adazukan, those are called, there are very spiritual ceremonial stories. Part of our deepest Adazukan comes from the story of sugar and the Ninyatik, the maple tree. Those are not stories that we can share at this time, because those stories specifically are to be shared during the winter times. And it's our hope that perhaps we can continue some of the story sharing and be able to share those directly with you. However, at part of understanding is knowing that those stories do go back for a long time. And the sugar and the sugar trees themselves have given themselves to us as Anishinaabe people for a long time, longer even than when we've been here specifically in this space. So there's a couple different avenues of knowledge. There's a couple different ideas about where the Ojibwe people came from. We have a migration story that's better recognized and understood, that talks about us coming from the East Coast and traveling, following a prophecy. If anyone's ever heard of this, the Seven Fires prophecy, and traveling from that East Coast and traveling through the St. Lawrence seaways, down through the rivers, through and around the Great Lakes until we wound up in my homeland, my reservation over in Muningwanekwa, or Madeline Island. And that travel, when that travel had occurred, one of the things that came with us, right, are those stories, those understandings. And the stories behind the maple and the maple tree came with us at that time. If anyone knows, where maple lives themselves, and we speak of maple as a nation, as a people. The Maple Nation spans not only in our home territory now, but all the way across over to that eastern seaboard. And so those stories traveled with us as we traveled this way, and we continue to be able to share in that same story all the way here until we arrived in this place. That migration path, there's a couple different ways. Some people think that we came from the East Coast and traveled here. Some people believe that we started here in these Great Lakes regions, traveled to the East Coast and came back here. And then there's another story that actually has us starting here, traveling all the way over to the West Coast and then back through here to the East Coast, and then finally ending here on our journey as Anishinaabe people. All of those have been understood through different stories and different historians. Of course, we still struggle with, traditional anthropology, and there's no proof, right? The scientists haven't proven one way or the other where we actually have come from. But all three of those stories are generally accepted in the background and historical understanding of who we are as Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people. We belong to the Algonquin Nation, and that is a very large nation that spans from here all the way over to the East Coast. The Algonquin language family encompasses our communities, the Menominee, the Odawa, the Potawatomi or Potawatomi. And then we also have connections with the Cree. You'll hear sometimes, especially up in Canada, the Ojibwe, the Métis Nation. All of these, we're all considered to be related in that way, and that goes to that root, the Algonquin root. They say that our oldest ancestors were called the Lene Lenape, And that's part of that historical understanding, that that's part of like where we actually rooted from. And so those stories of history, those historical understandings, they come from those Lene Lenape people. And some of our oldest Adazukanag, those oldest stories come from as far back into what the Chimukumanag, or the dominant society, will call prehistory, right? Because it was before they wrote it down. So that's part of like that historical background that we kind of wanted to share a little bit with you. Jerry was made mention some of the importance of what sugar means to our communities. And a piece of that to understand is the traditional economic structures that sugar provided for our communities. So understanding that this nation, though we understand it through our textbooks as, you know, this untouched land that people had never kind of been to, right? That, what is it, you know, a squirrel could jump from tree to tree and never touch the ground, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The American mythology really holds on to that understanding as if there were not people here. There are many wonderful indigenous scholars who have done a lot of the research to understand that that myth came along, of course, with the colonial settler storyline in order to better define for themselves their rights to be here in terms of conquering and conquest. And so it's really important to keep that in mind, to understand that this was a very vibrant and vital community across this continent and into South America as well. And that historical knowledge, when you learn and understand those real beautiful outlines of what it meant to be, we say Anishinaabe, right? You might hear that word Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. In the language itself, for us, Anishinaabe, we use that term to define the people who are indigenous to this place. And so I call myself Anishinaabe, but I would also call many of my other brothers and sisters from the different communities Anishinaabe as well. And that's the term that we'll use when we are actually speaking of all of our other relations on this continent and in the southern continent as well. And so part of that understanding is that we were all very, it was a very fluid system here. There was much traveling, there was a lot of trade, and we were really, where we came from and what we had in terms of sugar or copper, a lot of people understand this region for their copper. Those trade networks spanned across from, you know, sea to shining sea and all the way down south. And that sugar was another part of it. Our sugar, our wild rice, our copper, those are three things in those trade routes that were very important. Sugar itself, because of its ability for preservation and for food preservation, and then its own capacity to travel, right? When we think of maple, we always think about maple syrup. And Jerry points this out quite a bit. You know, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Why would we be traveling around with a bunch of birch bark boxes full of syrup? You can't travel with those things. You can't bring those to the people. And so the sugar is actually more of a traditional understanding in terms of our relation to maple. And so part of that understanding that sugar was really vital to that economy, and it really helped. We were very willing to be able to trade that and to be able to reciprocate, not only for ourselves and our communities, and how important it was for our own sustenance and survival, but for other people in this place as well. Sugar was very important to all of those understandings. Another understanding that is kind of misconstrued is the importance of maple sugar in the colonial settler history. And when a lot of the colonial settlers arrived on this continent, they didn't know how to survive here, right? They didn't understand how to feed themselves and care for themselves in this place. And before a lot of the urban centers and the farming centers were developed, they had to rely on what was already here. And sugar was really, really important. If you think about the time period for sugar, it always comes after, we call it that time of, the time of want and the time of need, that deep, deep winter time, that January, February time. And it comes after that time of starving, right? You're hungry, you haven't eaten good fresh food, you know, you just are relying on the last of your supplies. And so sugar is this first time, it's one of the first foods. We joke about it here in our home, you know, it's our Ojibwe New Year, because when that sugar comes, when that sugar is being able to be tapped and it's coming out of those trees and we're processing it, it's one of the first times that we're able to, one, come together in bigger groups. We get to celebrate. I think Antonio will show you all the hard work it takes just doing it with just a couple people in your kitchen. But you have to imagine this was one of the first times our bands and our communities came together, back together after long, hard winters. And so it was a time when everyone was able to work, everyone was able to come together, all the children, all the grandparents, aunties, uncles. We all were together sharing the labor and then sharing, of course, the fruits of that labor, right? That sweet and goodness. We have a nice statistic that's really important that'll help you kind of understand how vital it was. Even up to the turn of the 20th century, sugar was supplementing a lot of the failed farming and inadequate farming that was happening in a place like up here, where you can't just plow the lands and hope to actually provide food that'll care for your family. It's just not enough. And so not only was it supplying our families, but it was supplying families all the way out to the East Coast. So I have a couple quotes. We use this book pretty regularly. It's called Rites of Conquest, written by Charles Cleland. And so this is where we've gotten a lot of really good statistics out of there. They've done some really wonderful research trying to get that information out to other people. On page 243 in that book, there's a quote in there. In 1865 alone, the Keweenaw Bay bands, so just this community, sold 452,252 pounds of maple sugar. And the sugar was by far the most important export from Keweenaw Bay specifically. Tens of thousands of pounds were shipped annually to the Eastern American cities in those birch bark boxes, those makakon. So that's just like one number to kind of think about. And so like we're sitting here and we'll show you and we'll do some demonstrations on the amount of syrup and sugar it all takes. But you've got to think, I mean, I think Antonio and them, you guys are probably on your first maybe pound right now. And we've been going at it for about like an hour and a little bit now, hour and a half even already. And we're talking, that's 1 pound right now, right? So you have to imagine to see 452,252 pounds, what kind of work that means. Like how many trees do you have to tap for that? How much syrup do you have to boil down? Sap do you have to boil down? And then this other process here that you're seeing Antonio help us with, how much work that takes to constantly be working all of that syrup into sugar itself. So that's really important to kind of take into context right now. That's why we're trying to share some of this history with you. One of a really important point that Jerry really finds valuable to bring up when he's talking about this. So Jerry's a forester. Myself, I've been doing a lot of language and culture. That's been a lot of the work that I've done personally. Jerry has his degree in the Western forestry. And so he's done a lot of this research from that perspective, and he's really thought about this really hard from that point of view. One of his arguments is that part of the reason why, if you think about it, you know, who does syrup? When you think about maple and you think about maple syrup, who do you think of when you're thinking, oh, I go to the store and I pick up my syrup, right? Like, where does it come from? Not many people, and now more locally, a lot of times nowadays, especially with the local food movements, we're really trying hard to actually do this from our own homes. But traditionally, I guess typically what you would understand or see in those grocery stores, you're going to see the folks from out on the East Coast, and then you're going to see Canada, right? Like they even have that maple leaf right on their flag. So a lot of people associate, oh, they must be the ones who produce syrup, and a lot of people don't even know, you know, we produce sugar. And so one of the arguments or one of the discussions that Jerry's really put forward is the idea that it's that timber industry that happened here. So if you think about the timeline, the actual historical timeline, the timber industry came here in the 1855 was when everything was started to be opened up to the timber barons, and they started stripping the land here. And it went all the way through to the 1900s, the early 1900, 1910. And I was looking up a lot of these codes, trying to figure out, where does this idea that comes from, right? Like, why is it that we aren't known here in Michigan or here in the Midwest region? Why is it that we're not known for this, and that it was here that, even though it was here that so much of this was coming at that time? One of the understandings is that logging itself, it was so intensive that by 1910, the once abundant forests here had almost completely vanished. I mean, they were gone at that point in time. And you would think, right, what are they doing? They're taking this land and they're taking the trees off. The hardwoods themselves, they were just stripping them. They couldn't actually work them. They wanted those pines, those white pines and red pines. And so 90% of the land and area of this state was timbered, was actually taken. And by the 1840s already, the places where a lot of those hardwoods were known, most specifically actually down farther south, down further than where we are here, that hardwood belt had been cleared of all the hardwoods in order to clear lands for farming and in order to clear lands for settlement. So a lot of that understanding, when you think about what happened here and what was happening here at that time period, when we were so prominent as Anishinaabe people in terms of our production of sugar, at that time the timber barons came through, they cleared this land out, the settlers came through and they took the lands for farmlands, and the sugar industry, you can't have a bunch of Indians still being Indians, right? Like, if you want to civilize a group of people, they can't keep doing the work that they're doing in order to survive. We use sugar, that was part of it. And so it really makes a lot of sense that the intensive interventions to civilize the Anishinaabe people, and then on top of it, the intensive timbering that had happened here, what was left in terms of the actual economic ability to produce sugar then fell back to over on the East Coast. A lot of those original loggers and timber barons were actually folks who came from Maine and New York and those areas. And so by that time, if you think about when they had the opportunity, their first original settlements in those early 1600s, 1700s, by that time their forests were starting to regenerate, and it was those hardwoods that they had access to because they wanted the pines. They were cutting them down to build things, and they were running out of pines themselves. And so that industry shifted from the Anishinaabe and the indigenous people back over to the East Coast, where those colonial settlers were living. And that since that point, a lot of the colonial settlers have dominated that industry, and you will find now very few, if any, traditional Anishinaabe producers. And that's something that should be really taken into consideration. We find a lot of pressures here on our farm to modernize, right? To break away from doing this the way that we would traditionally have done it, where it would be communal, where we would have the family here, where the community would gather, because you can't make a full-time living at this. It's very difficult, and so it's easier to go down to the shop and get a job part-time at the casino, or we're stuck in these economic industries right now. And what our goal has been as a family, as family producers, is to start revitalizing that, bringing those stories back to the forefront, helping other people learn and understand it. And so that's been some of the efforts. We're very fortunate. We have access to these trees right here on our property. And in that time period, both Jerry and myself, we've been learning over and over again what it means to be sugar makers again. Like he said, he comes from a long line of sugar makers. Our families are long histories of making the sugar. And so now now we're doing our best to share, and maybe I'll flip this story back over to Antonio and we can start talking about kind of what's going on in the kitchen. We're really lucky. Jerry got to go down and spend some time down in Detroit to establish a sugar bush down with them this past spring. And you are now seeing the fruits of that labor in that kitchen right there, working through that trough and really getting them girls some good biceps. Look at them.
It looks so good. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
I wondered if maybe before we switch to Antonio, maybe we can see if there's any questions out there. And I'll kick it off because I have a question. So Miss Katy, you were talking about the Algonquin Nation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, and you said they had a shared language and cultural like stories and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Was there like can you speak a little bit more on that? Like, was there a shared governance at all, or like what was the structure and the things that brought them together as a nation? Like,
sure. So
we think of like president, Congress, like what kind of things like brought them together as a nation?
Right. So when we talk about the Algonquin roots, so that is the Algonquin family. A lot of times we'll talk about that structure from like the actual family root, the language root. So the Algonquin family, when I talk about that first stems from the language family. So it's one of the preeminent languages here on this continent is that root. And so you'll find that someone from being Ojibwe way over here west over in Minnesota, Wisconsin will be able to know and understand words, root words, things that would be all the way over onto the East Coast and from what we would understand as like a different nation as a whole. There's that bigger, wider, big root, right? So sometimes we'll compare it to like the Romance languages, right? Where like if you're speaking Spanish, you can probably understand some Italian words, right? Or you can understand maybe where they come from because they've rooted way a long time ago back in that original language that was considered that Romance language. So that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about that Algonquin family. When we talk about our nation as Ojibwe people, a lot of times we'll refer ourselves as the Three Fires Nation. So some people understand some of the history. It's a little better known like the Iroquois Confederacy. That's an understanding where different groups of tribal affiliations came together as this larger confederacy in order to provide protection and trade and economic support and stability for their individual smaller tribes, right? So for us as Ojibwe people, as Anishinaabe people, we're a part of what we call the Three Fires Confederacy, the Three Fires Nations. So that's the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and then the Budwadami. Those are the three. And then we also have close affiliations with the Menominee, very similar language. And we worked really closely with them as well. And so those three nations, we all individually lived with our own governing structures, our own languages. But it was said that we could all three, four, including the Menominee, we could all come together at a fire, all speak individually our own individual languages, and all understand each and every one of the other people who were there. Not translating, not having translators there, but actually understand what was saying and what was happening. And that speaks very closely to that speaks to those real close ties that we all had together in understanding that we work together, right? So they say that the Odawa, the terminology for them, they were the traders, right? They were the ones who facilitated trade in our communities. And were the ones who facilitated trade across this nation, what we call the Anishinaabe Nation or the Ojibwe Nation. They say the Budwadami, they were the fire keepers. That's what their name in Ojibwe, when we say Padwadami or Budwadami, the ones who build the fires. They were the fire keepers of our nations. And then the Ojibwe, our communities were known as like the warrior societies. And then we also had a very powerful medicine society. And so those governing structures were all built individually up in those places, but we also work together in order to provide that strength of what's known as that nation or that confederacy. I can only really speak because I'm very, very biased and very, very Ojibwe. So I can only speak to the work that I've done understanding myself better as an Anishinaabe or an Ojibwe. And so the way that we structured our governing systems was very specific. So there's kind of different levels of it, right? So there's the small families, like the small little family groupings that then extended out into the larger band groupings. So like I'm a Red Cliff band member, Jerry's a Kiwana Bay band member. And then that then extended out into the Ojibwe nation kind of as a whole. And our nation is very large, right? So like if you look at our sphere of influence as Anishinaabe people, we have communities all the way out as far west as Montana, and then we have it as far, all the way far east as like the Hudson Bay areas, and all the way up north that way too into Canada. And so it's a very widespread nation in which it was necessary to, our governing structures had to be those smaller local representatives that dealt with the day-to-day basis, the day-to-day living, the subsistence living that we were provided, that then were brought out to the larger band structures in order to provide security and safety for our economies and our families and our communities, and then out larger as like the national, like our nation representation. Does that make sense? I don't know. I could go into way more details, but there's like books written about that. It'll take us all night.
I'll holler at you later.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Katy before we move on with Antonio and the process that he's doing there? We're all intently looking at you, Antonio.
It's like good. I like kind of being the voice of it. It's really nice watching you. I'm getting all distracted and drooling.
Right. I'm like, what is going on? So any other questions for Katy? Thank you for that. That was really eye-opening. If there's no questions, nothing coming up in the chat box, feel free to throw your questions in there.
I'll also say while you're talking, Tep, for those of you that are listening and checking the chat box, I am dropping a few links in there as Katy was talking. So if you want like a little more information there, or if you're not taking notes, you can check those links to kind of jar your memory.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Antonio, are you ready? I think you were gonna go next.
Yeah. I'll mute that one because it's echo.
Can't hear you there.
Hey, okay. I think, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Cool. So I'm gonna share my screen to show you guys some photos of this sugar bush project. But let me pause this for a second. So this really began last year. I attended the Intertribal Food Summit, which is a food summit that happens among different tribes every year. And that's where I first learned about tapping maple trees and making maple syrup. I shared some photos about this earlier on my Facebook, on my Instagram. But I learned from some Anishinaabe elders, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and this woman named Mary Moose, about what it means to tap maple trees. And I came back to Detroit really just on the hunt for maple trees. Like, where can I find the biggest concentration of maple trees? And there was a sugar bush that was happening at U of M Dearborn in the Ecological Interpretive Center. So I was trying to find some sugar maples next to them. And I was hiking all through there in spring and winter the following year, in summer and fall the following year. And sugar maples really give themselves away in fall. So you can really identify sugar maples by the really beautiful yellow, orange, and sometimes red leaves that they have. So I was able to locate a bunch of maple trees inside Rouge Park. And myself, and I'll start sharing my screen now, myself, Shakira Tyler, and her daughter, we started tapping maple trees last year in Rouge Park. Just like really super basic. Here's some photos from it. But there's Mary Moose there, and Robin Wall-Kimmerer. And yeah, so we found a concentration of maple trees in the Rouge, and we were basically like on the side of the road with these white buckets, just kind of doing it kind of ghetto style. And we came up with like a tiny amount of sugar, of maple, but it was very inspiring. It was a really fun process. Maybe I harvested like 50 gallons of maple sap. And then the following year, I found the Stonebridge Trail in fall, and it was just so yellow, and the trees were clearly sugar maple trees. And one of the big identifying features of sugar maple trees is in the springtime is these buds. They're very, very pointy. You can actually like stab yourself with them. They're really strong, really hard, and they have this opposite branching. So when I found these sugar maples, I knew this was a great location. I started marking the trees, and I started reaching out to different people, like who can I get permission from? Who can we ask about this? Where can we learn how to do this process? So I reached out to a bunch of Anishinaabe friends, and these are actually trees where sugaring has happened in the past. You can see those marks from people who have been tapping those trees in the past. So that's also another big giveaway for where a sugar bush is. And then we basically connected with Friends of the Rouge to ask them if anybody was, tapping trees in the region. And they were really cool and really open to the idea. And then we made friends with the folks at Detroit Outdoors, and that's how we got connected with Garrett. We also reached out to Detroit Black Food Security Network and the D-Town Farms, which is an African-centered farm that's in the area that Shakira Tyler works at. And a group of us, including a lot of folks from Black to the Land, decided to get this sugar bush going in the Rouge. And that's when Jerry came down, and I'll show you some pictures of that. We set up a camp. We stayed the night there for a couple when Jerry was around while we were establishing the sugar bush and setting it up. That's David Pitawanakwat, who's one of the, he's from Wikwemikong. Yeah, and it was a really great process. Jerry, this is a photo of Jerry tapping trees. We use a drill. And we connected these buckets with tubes that ran from the trees. We put in these metal things called spiles. And then my computer's being slow. And then we put together, this is our first fire setup. And Jerry brought down this big bucket thing, which is like a saucer. Jerry, what's the proper name for this thing? It's a big pan that we were boiling the maple syrup into.
It's called an evaporator. If you can hear me.
Mm-mm.
Can you hear me, Antonio?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, that's an evaporator.
What?
That's an evaporator.
Yeah, evaporator. Yes. Yeah, and then we started tapping trees. Here's a photo of a bunch of us with a plastic tube running into our buckets. Yeah. You wanna go get it? Yeah. And then, sorry, this app is kind of being slow.
Yeah, while you're pulling up the next picture, that's a 5-gallon bucket. And, for those of you that know the weight of liquid, each bucket was about 50 pounds and it was full of sap. Man, it was something carrying those buckets. It felt like Shaolin training.
It's really hard. So what you're supposed to do is like push.
And then got some buckets, and I had a bunch of friends come by and help chop wood. So we gathered wood from around. We had to recruit some additional help behind me. My roommate Jonathan to help mix the maple sugar because it's just getting super hard. Wow. Like I'm in the middle of doing a bunch of stuff behind me. But here's a photo of us just all chopping up wood and preparing it for the fire. And then here's the boil actually happening.
All right, man. Thanks for your help today. For real.
Yeah. And then one of the beautiful things about setting up the sugar bush in the winter is just like you're really watching the season transition from, so it was like muddy and a little bit wet. There was like a flood the weeks before. And then there's a huge snowfall. So here's like my little niece helping us collect sap from the buckets and pour it into a larger container we were holding it in. And there's so when we started boiling, once you get all that wood going, you have to like really babysit it. So we were there for like anywhere from 12 to 18 hours at a time, just boiling sap down to get to maple syrup. And it's a 40-to-1 ratio. So it's literally 40 gallons of maple sap, which comes from the tree, to get you 1 gallon of maple syrup.
Hey, Antonio, we had a question earlier about how much sap was harvested.
Yeah, I think we didn't. It's hard to measure because we were kind of boiling it as we went. But I think we got about like 400, somewhere between 350, 300 to 5. It's definitely less than 2 times we filled up the 250 gallon tote. So I think we tapped about 65, 64 trees, and we got about 400 gallons of maple syrup or maple sap, and that boiled down to like 10 gallons of syrup or so. Yeah, and then we had students from my program, which is the Detroit Leadership and Environmental Education Program, come through and my screen is still shared. Come through and help us move stuff, help us move sap and boil. So there's like teaching the youth was a big educational component of this. And near the end of the sugar bush, I don't know if you guys see this photo good. It's like a bunch of ants that started to amass with the syrup. I'm pausing talking because Katie suggested that we add a little bit of butter to the maple syrup when it begins to boil. So that's what I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm. There was a question in the chat box, maybe for Jerry or Katie. Before they had those big long evaporator pans, how would the processing go before that?
So if you guys can hear me, I might lose service. We're going pretty off the road. There's a lot of different methods that were employed back then. It's very similar to now. There's a lot of different methods, a lot of different types of evaporators. So there wasn't necessarily like this one method that was used by people. Further south in the Anishinaabe Nation, I know there's a lot of people that have talked about the use of pottery for boiling. Those stories, I've never come across those stories in my community, but there are, stories about using birch bark containers. You can boil liquid in the birch bark containers, and I think a lot of people forget about how well we could manipulate fire back in the day. We had a fire going, day in and day out. And so when people think about using a fire to boil, they think about a raging fire, but that's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need something like that. You just need something that's hotter than 212 degrees to get evaporation. And so you could actually set these birch bark containers on or suspend them above coals, and you could still get the evaporation effect from that. And then you also have to remember that we didn't have Zoom conference calls that we had to worry about. We didn't have, schools that we had to send our kids to, or, basketball practice and stuff like that. It's like, that's what we did. And so it was a much larger operation, much larger scale, more hands, more people helping. And everyone did it. So that's another method too, is like log boiling. You can hollow out a log, and you can toss rocks in there, and that will boil your sap too.
One more method that I know my community and our people have always talked about is not using fire at all, and relying on, especially early in the season, the fact that everything freezes at night. And so you would actually be able to reduce a lot of your water by pulling ice off of your, because they're makuk, like they were actually going into the basket, the baskets themselves. And so you pull that top layer of ice off, and you're just pulling water out. And so a lot more of what was left over was that higher sugar concentrate. And we still use that method. Me and my kids to this day are like, all right, get that ice out of there, guys. We're going to get a lot of good sugar out of this one. So that's another thought to think of too.
I've heard of that, Katie. Can you tell Jared why you mentioned adding butter to the mixture that Antonio was doing, and then he's asking, like, well, before you could add butter, like what other kind of things, cows not being indigenous to this land, like what other materials would you use before cows came, I guess? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if you can hear me, I'll try to answer that too.
Okay.
So basically, all you're doing when you're bringing that syrup up to a really high temperature, the bubbles get really sticky. And if you don't add anything to it, they could just basically climb on themselves and boil over. And so all butter does is acts like a surfactant that basically makes the bubbles less sticky, if that makes sense. And so you're less likely to have a boil over. Back in the day, what we used, from what my dad was talking about, was using cedar boughs or balsam boughs. And as that's boiling up, you can, it kind of looks like you smack it. You kind of smack it with cedar boughs or balsam boughs. And when those boughs hit that hot liquid, it releases some of the oils from the plant. And then those oils then become that surfactant that keeps the bubbles down from boiling over. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got that. Jared, if you have other questions, feel free to chime in there.
Yeah, baby. I'm just showing a video on my screen of some sap boiling. It's not actually quite boiling yet. It's like going to boil.
Yeah.
Beautiful shot.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you, Jonathan. Oh my God.
We actually had so there's like a gun range on the side of Rouge Park near us, so there's always gunfire there, and we're used to like hearing gunfire when we're hanging out in the sugar bush. And there's actually like a bunch of cops that came up because they thought so somebody called and said there was a gunfire. So the cops kind of came with their guns out, and like you can see him putting it away right there. Just kind of curious what we were doing over here in the woods. It was crazy. But it was like 6 of them, all from the street, that kind of came at us while we were in the middle of harvesting sap and boiling sap. And I had to grab Bizu because I didn't want him to get shot by one of them.
Right. Antonio, we have another question here.
Yeah.
And I think this is Jarrett. He said he's also wondering what kind of things do we need to be concerned about harvesting maple sap in the city? And it says he seems to recall here that maples, what is this? Good at pulling toxins from the soil. Is that true? So if he set up a sugar bush on the east side, what should he be concerned with about soil pollution leaching into the sap?
So as far as I know, that the trees does a pretty good job filtering it. They're kind of just like one big filter that the sap kind of comes up through. And it's not like you're just pulling water out of the ground. The trees make sugar all year long. It's what trees do with photosynthesis, is they use chlorophyll to make sugar, and they store that sugar in the roots in the wintertime. So in the wintertime, all of the energy from the tree gets sucked out from the tree and it goes into the roots. And then in the springtime, the pressure from underground and like the leaves, everything, the sun making things warm up, it kind of, the sugar water kind of expands from storage in the roots into the tree's leaves and buds. And that's what we're tapping.
All right, sweet. We got another question in the chat. Are sugar maples the only trees that are tapped traditionally?
You can tap walnuts pretty well, but there's other types of maple trees that you can tap as well. But for all the other types of maple trees, the concentration of sugar that comes with it is way, way, way less. So you could tap red maple, it's like a bit less. Silver maple is like quite a bit less. I heard you can tap like even like poplar. After sugar maple season, people often tap birch too. But there's other trees. Maybe Jerry and Katy could answer that too.
I think black maple might be another one.
Yeah, you can tap black maple trees as well. I believe it's the scientific name for that one. There's Antonio mentioned right after the maple season is done, the birch sap starts running. And we tapped some yellow birch at my sister's house this year, and it's yellow birch there. And like he mentioned, the sugar content a lot lower in those trees. And so instead of like 40 to 1 ratio, you're looking at some cases like 80 to 1. And so the amount of boiling that it takes to get anything significant is a lot. So I don't think a lot of people do that. You can. There's a lot of medicinal qualities too with those different trees. And apparently I sound like a robot. I apologize. We're out in the middle of a pueblo right now. But there's a lot of different things, and that could be like a whole other session to talk about different foods and stuff like that. I don't want to digress too much. But absolutely, everything out there has a purpose, whether it's medicine or food.
So I actually have a question for Katy and Jerry. How do you get it? I keep coming up with like taffy. It's very taffy-ish. We're trying to make it into sugar, and it's taffy-ish.
I would say that's a temperature thing, Antonio. If you're boiling again, I'm not sure what temperature you pulled it off of the stove for that first batch. You know what it was? You're muted.
It was like 252, and this next one was
Okay.
like 260. So it was like much higher, but it's still very taffy-like.
So you can try 265 if you can.
Yeah.
But then the other factor when you actually try to granulate those sugars is the amount of invert sugars that's actually in the syrup itself. And so as the season progresses, the chemistry of that sap changes as well, and the sugar configurations change. And towards the end of the season, you get much less invert sugars, and so it doesn't granulate very well. And so depending on when your syrup that you're boiling right now specifically, if it's a late run, it may not granulate.
Yeah. I think we got taffy. I think we got a lot of taffy over here.
Man, that stuff's still good too.
I was about to say, taffy's good.
That was some.
All the kids that is around is gonna be just climbing up your door, dude. So I know a lot of the time, so Jerry and I, when we're doing a lot of the sugar here at the house, we do a lot of that first early run is the stuff that will turn into sugar very specifically. Those first few runs, those are the most beautiful sugar that kind of comes out of those ones. And that's what Jerry's talking about. He's talking about those inverted sugars. And so we save a lot of that later run stuff for like actually bottling, and it's real opposite to what you'll find in like mainstream. You know, they'll grade the different syrups, right? And so they'll have grade A, and it's that beautiful light amber, and a lot of people want to see that when they're going shopping or grocery shopping. They want to see that real beautiful sugar or that real beautiful syrup. But in reality, when we're working on it, when we're working on that at home, we are really excited to turn that into sugar because it's just it becomes just wonderful, wonderful sugar. It granulates really nicely. And that darker stuff, we'll bottle that darker stuff because we like that real strong maple flavor. And we don't care what it looks like because we're going to eat it. We don't want to look at it.
Good stuff you're holding there, Antonio.
It's so beautiful. So beautiful.
That's the lights in the background you can see. Yeah.
But I guess also it represents
So
like all his work.
Please take us to the end part for the thank you day part.
I just saw a question from Sam pop up too about like why does the flavor change over the season, and a lot of that has to do with the bacteria. There's bacteria everywhere, and as the temperatures start warming up, bacteria starts to proliferate. And actually bacteria it's just naturally in the sap. But as it warms up, they start multiplying more. The bacteria starts eating on the sugars, and they'll actually eat those inverted sugars too. So if you leave your something like that, you won't have as much. Your sugar content will actually go down, and then you'll have less invert sugars as well, which means you have to boil it longer, which means you get more caramelization in the process, which adds to the flavor, and also more of that mapley flavor too. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. I think I saw another question that popped up too about using wood fire, or boiling over an open fire like Antonio was doing at Rouge Park. Does that smoke
impart a smoky flavor to it?
The flavor on the syrup that we made from Rouge is super, super smoky flavor. It's really smoky.
It's wonderful. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it looks cool, that process. And the old timers will say that's the best syrup that you can get. And I tend to agree with them. I really love that. I mean, you'll get like vanilla, hints of vanilla, the maple, the smoke, all of that kind of rolled in there. And it's just a really complex, amazing flavor. But the downfall of that, if you're just doing like an open boil, I think Antonio had mentioned that earlier too, is that the amount of firewood that you need. So you need a ton of firewood if you're going to be boiling outside like that. For our operation at our house, we're actually using a wood-fired evaporator because we were going through firewood. And so we don't necessarily get that smoky flavor translated into the syrup itself, but we still get a lot of the caramelization process from the fire too. So yeah, basically all your processes are going to have an impact on that flavor some way, shape, or form.
Do you want to tell us more about what you're doing, Antonio? I think you're muted, Tony.
And actually, Garrett posted something in the chat talking about when Jerry once explained how the process allows, I think it was niter spelling, to remain present in the sugar. Can you talk a little bit about that, Jerry? Or Katie?
So the niter sands, and I'll just talk until Jerry can jump back on, because it sounds like he's getting out of service again. The niter sand, that's what Antonio actually just pulled some out of his bucket. We were struggling with the name, so thanks for remembering that, Chris, or Garrett. There you go. Yeah, there's the niter sands there. And you're still muted, Antonio. So there you go. So that's what the niter sands will look like. And in the filtration process, so you'll, like the big operations, they use the filter press. A lot of people use that reverse osmosis. And a lot of their goal is to get rid of all of that, everything that is pouring there. They like to pull that out. For us, a lot of times, and especially when we're going straight to sugar, we like to keep a lot of those in there. They see that the maple and the sugar itself, there's a lot of minerals. Like the reason why maple is so healthy for you, it's so good for you, is not just because it's simply sugar, right? But there's all these additional minerals that are included in there. And so those niter sands, we'll filter it out, and we filter them out through like the simple stock filters that we use, and we'll pull them off. But a lot of times, if you reduce your filtering, you'll get a little more of those sands in there, and those minerals will be able to stay behind. I actually used mine this year, and I'll stick my video back on here. So I took my niter sands this year because we were filtering them out. We had to cook it so much, right? That I made myself a scrub with it, this year, because I really was interested in like how we could use it. And so I made a sugar scrub with the niter sands and some coconut oil. And I just used the granulated white sugar because, I'm not going to eat it. I might as well put it on my face. So that's one of the uses that we've used it for. But I know we have a lot more especially in our sugar. We have a lot more of that because we want to keep those minerals present. Those are some of the things that will start helping with that health and improving, actually integrating that back into some of your diet.
I've kept a 5-gallon bucket of some, like it's maybe like a half full, so like 2.5 gallons, 3 gallons of maple syrup, just for today's teaching. And this was stuck on the bottom of it, so I poured all the syrup through another filter just to start today, and then this miter sand, you called it, was stuck at the bottom, and it didn't pour out, so it was like just kind of gooped on the bottom. And I was asking Katie what it was. It's really sweet. It's like grainy, but really rich and sweet. I like the flavor of it. And this is what the filters look like. There's still a little bit of sap kind of dripping down from them. But these are really big filters, and we used this filter many, many times already at the site, and then we refiltered it again here at home before, and that took out a lot of this miter sand stuff. But this is just like kind of some of the finer pieces that made it through, but they kind of got stuck to the bottom as the maple syrup has been sitting for the last 3 weeks. Like I made this, can I see the spoon? I made this spoon here out of like yellow ash, I think. And we've been using it to stir, but like I have these metal spoons and they're literally like not strong enough. They keep bending, but like the sugar is really, really difficult. I need like a better equipment. I think the mixing machine that Katy and Jerry has is like the way to go. This is like old school Nasanagan style. That's what this dish is called. And it's really old school, but I'm failing.
So I have everything all set up. If you guys want to, I'll give you a little tour through. I think.
Let's see your op.
See if I can flip this. Hold on, my camera operator's over here with me. Oh, there's Kelsey. Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
How you doing?
Good to meet you all. Just gonna do this.
Glad you're with us.
She knows what she's doing. I do not.
While they're getting it together, I did include Sugar Bush supplies in the chat as well. Supply link.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so here, welcome to my kitchen. This is way cleaner than it normally is, so you guys are lucky. I cleaned my counters pretty well. So this is typically what our little setup will look like. I had everything all set up and ready to go just in case we needed some backup here. So here is our first step, and this is kind of what Antonio's been working on, and it's a lot harder to show you this when you're hot in the middle of it, so that's kind of why I got it set up so that we could make sure that we could show you guys exactly kind of what he's doing. He's got a similar setup. I kind of walked through it with him earlier so that he could kind of get himself going on what he was doing. So here is this is like what our warming pan, so you can see I've actually got syrup in there already. And what we'll do is we'll start this and we'll warm our pan up. We'll get that syrup all nice and warm. And then as that's sitting here in the back warming up, you can take the ladles kind of right out of there. See? And now this is not hot yet because I didn't do anything with it. And then, so we'll take this, and once this is nice and warm, we'll transfer it over to the pot here. This is just a quart-sized pot here that we'll use, and I think we do anywhere from 4 to 6 of these ladle scoops. We usually start with 4. I think I'm on 3, and then 4. And so as you're doing that, what happens, because what Antonio was talking about with the butter, right? So you get this little guy going, and we have our nice little setup. What happens with this is that this will start boiling, and once it gets past about 190 degrees, it'll start boiling up and bubbling up. And what Antonio was saying when he put that butter on top, and what Jerry was talking about, the surfactant levels, right? They'll start getting to the point where they'll really go kind of crazy. And in a little pot like this, they'll just bloop, boil right over, right? So that gets boiling, and as we're boiling that, we gotta let it go, let it go. Antonio was showing you that, or was talking with Jerry about like what temperature you would actually bring it up to. This is our little candy thermometer, and so we use the settings between the softball and or hardball and hard crack, so that between 253 and then like Jerry was showing Antonio, like even all the way up to 265 is how he went. We got really fancy this year, and we got ourselves a digital candy thermometer. So that's been really helpful because you can actually preset the whole thing to the temperature that you want it on. And we'll get that bad boy all set up like this. Oops, goes in like this, sorry. And You can see we're already starting to heat up over here. I know how to turn it on. There it is. So it'll tell you exactly what temperature it is. This one's nice. So here, if you look right on here, it even has that preset, right? So it's preset to that 252 right there. And so we can just we'll just be able to let that sit, and we'll let that be able to boil up. And then once that gets boiling, see here, look at how quick that temperature is, 95, 96, going up, boop, boop, boop. When we get this part, and this is actually boiling, we have this set up over here where we got the fancy boy, right? So we got the KitchenAid here. And this makes a huge difference, especially in the amount of sugar that we're processing. So once that's boiling properly, we'll come over here, we dump it in this way, get it on, and then set this going, because this paddle in here does all the work that like all 5 of my grandmas and aunties would have been doing otherwise. So that's kind of how we're set up here. After we get done with that whole process, we have a little system, because a lot of our sugar goes to sale, right, or to gifts. And so we prefer to do like a granulated is how we kind of have it set up. And so the kids and I, usually Jerry's over here handling all of the actual like going through. It's really hard. You can't really take your eyes off this if you're constantly going. So he'll usually be over here working on the actual transferring from the syrup over to the sugar, and then the kids and I will be over in the in the main part in the living room there, and we'll sift. We'll actually use our sifter like this, and we'll sift through, and we'll sift the granulated sugar out, and then we're able to like package it a lot easier and send that out. I have a little bit of sugar here. These are, we always call them the crumbly bits. I tell them this is my house sugar, and sometimes I keep a lot more than maybe I have to. But
sorry, something just happened with the video. It went all dark. I don't know. Sorry about the video technical difficulties. I'll just start again.
Yep, there
okay.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So then these are what we call the crumbly bits. So when that sugar's going, when we're sifting it out, you can see this is like our sugar will come out real soft like that. And sometimes you'll get these other harder bits that you'll find in the sugar, and it's like candy. So I have my syrup going over here now, so I'm going to keep an eye on it. If you want to come look, you can see the bubbles going on it.
Oh, yeah.
So here's the bubbles getting going. Yep, about 215. And so now about 220. And you got to be real gentle with it, right? Because these bubbles will start going. I have a smaller pan, and they'll go real crazy like that. And I always just go back and forth until my heat is kind of settling on it. And you can actually see these bubbles change after they go through this like frothy part. So that looks like it'll stay. Yeah, going a little bit higher. This is the part I was telling Antonio. When you're doing this part, you want to be careful. And that's when you can use that surfactant. So we have actual professional like defoaming oil, because we have that big evaporator now. So we have to be able to kind of use it real regularly. But this is a time when you just like get a little dab of butter on there and be able, I don't know if y'all ever defoam your beer, but a little bit of grease and defoam it right off, right? Same idea, same concept. So then we just kind of let this guy go. Sorry, my thermometer's yelling at me here. And now I'm going to use my defoamer because and this batch in particular, this specific batch of syrup has been really foamy for us. So we've really had to keep a good eye on it. And if you can get back in here, can you see how these bubbles are starting to change a little bit? They're not quite as foamy right over here, and they start getting bigger like that. And it looks like it's starting to cool off.
You could compare her bubbles with my bubbles.
Yeah. So there's Antonio's bubbles over there. See how much closer his bubbles are?
My temperature is around 2 to upper 250s. So I'm about
Yep, and
to run off, I think.
I'm over here at 223. So now I can just kind of let this be, and I can just sit here. Antonio was asking me earlier, he said, do I have to stir it? Is it going to burn? I said, no, as long as you watch your actual temperatures, you don't have to stir it. You can let it go. You just got to get it past that really foamy part, that stage. And once you've gotten it past that, you're pretty good. You want to keep an eye on it, and you want to be able to still like actually be here with everything. But it's a little less urgent right now. So yeah, that's how we do it over here. Antonio, you guys still working over that way?
And this syrup here is, I'm trying to push it to 260 some, just to see if that helps us, like Jerry suggested. So we're about 263, and Jonathan, my buddy, is just about done cleaning out that Nasanagan, so I'm gonna transfer over.
Familiar with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty empty.
Yeah, and all the old stuff will go right into it. You can use that metal one or whichever. Yeah. The stuff from the sides, it'll melt in right into it.
So Kelsey was just over here talking about how good it smells. I more than once have wished that Zoom had like a smell Zoom on here, because y'all don't even know what's happening in this kitchen.
It's incredible.
I feel like I can smell it through there. I just smell so good. It looks so good.
It's even crazier when we got like this going, and we've got like leeks going in the dehydrator, and we're doing like the whole combo, and you're just cooking away.
We turned up the temps. Hopefully,
You never really realize how much you love your food until you're just sitting here working with it. So this is really common too, and I was showing Antonio this when he was first going through. So we've been kind of hovering at this 227, that 230.
The host stopped their
someone
video.
stopped their video.
Sorry. I was trying to spotlight. Can you rejoin us?
We're pressing start video. It still says the host has stopped their video. Yeah, still getting the same. You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. Oh, start my video.
Fixed.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, really common here is like you'll watch, this is really hovering here at that 220, between 220 and 230. And a lot of people, oh, I can look away, or I don't have to pay attention. And I was showing Antonio, once it gets past this 230, and again, like, you can check out these bubbles, right? See the color they are from. It'll hit this point almost about 240, and then it'll just really start moving and go quick on you. So it's really important to just kind of keep watching it. And part of it, and Jerry really points this out all the time, especially when I was first learning how to do this. I've always been the sap hauler, right? Like I'm always all about like doing my weights and lifting all those 50 pounds on each arm. So I'm not much of like the kitchen person. This has been a lot of what Jerry has done. He does a lot of the fire work, and then he does a lot of the actual like boiling. And so I've done it, like I can handle it, but this is something that sometimes I'm out of my comfort zone. But one of the things that I've been learning the more that we do this, right, is you learn, like Jerry had said, like a long time ago, we learned our fire so well. We knew our fires and how everything looked, but you learn your syrup and you learn your sugars too.
You can see on my computer how the sap is kind of changing. It was very dark, and we boiled it, turned off the stove, and it's becoming increasingly light. And then it'll become kind of like eventually like that taffy sort of stuff we have in the back.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you really just have to like spend time with it, right? Like you have to, the only reason why you get to know exactly what that sugar will do or what the fires will do is that you just are constantly doing it over and over. I think Chris can probably speak to that. He was the fire keeper down there for a good few nights, right? Like learning what that boiling does and learning what everything does when you're in that syrup and sap and sugar, those different processes. you really get to know. And I was telling Antonio, I was like, oh, you must be at like 240 right now. And he's like, oh my goodness, yeah, like 241 or 237. You get to really understand it, what temperatures you're at, because you learn it just by sight, by smell, by sound. Even the bubbles will start sounding real specific. So it's good work. So yeah, here we are climbing up again now. We got past that 230 stage. Bubbles are slowing down a little bit. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
So Katie, so the entire process, what you had in the larger pan, was that the water straight from the maple, like that watery substance?
This is the syrup. So the whole process will go sap to syrup to sugar. We do a pause, right? So we don't typically go all the way to sugar, because we use the evaporator, the big evaporator out there. We'll use that one, and we bring everything up to syrup. Because for us, we can store it. We have like these bins are right here. These are some of our storage bins, 5-gallon storage bins that we'll use. We'll use those. We'll store everything in there, and then we'll decide what we want to do from there. Because a lot of times we'll make our sugar fresh to order, right? So we'll have these this syrup that's from a certain part of the year that we know is still really good for sugar making, and we'll know that we'll want to use those for sugar. So we'll keep that as syrup, and so that's why we do this warming pan here, and we'll warm it up here, so that then we can transfer it over here and we can make the sugar. We always make ours in these smaller batches. We try not to do really, really big batches. One, because there's more control, right? But then two, you can really understand what's happening with it. If there's an instance kind of like where Antonio is at right now, right, where he's working on it and it's not quite becoming granulated, we'll know that, and we can know by what batch we're working with. And so we try to keep some of our batches a lot smaller, because we're expanding and we're getting more than other people typically would get. So I was telling you guys, we're going here. That's my warning bell, so I can run in here if I'm somewhere else. And it's about 2:49 right now. It'll tell us, oh, we're getting ready. And then it gets panicky in a little bit, and it'll say, hey, are you paying attention, lady? So I'm hitting 252 right now. I'll pull that off, and then set that guy right here. I'll come right over here, and I literally just pour it right in. Right into the KitchenAid. This bad boy comes up and on. This is our first setting. We usually have it on the second setting here. And the light's pretty bad, so give me a second. I'll get you guys more light. It's a little noisy, and I'll put it on mute here in a minute, but so you can see how it changes. So if you can see side by side, there's Antonio's screen right there, and how they're going back and forth, and my cheater screen up here. And we're able.
I say I want to be a cheater next year, Brad.
It's good though, but
Need that cheat machine.
Jerry was really pointing out, and there's a good point to this. It's very important to learn everything, and it's really hard to learn if you just start with all the good equipment, right? Like you learn to really appreciate all the hard work that goes into it when you're able to do that work by hand. And so it's one of those things where, I mean, it is really great. And for us, like actually having an operation, it's really important that we're able to do this, even this small scale for what we're doing. But it was that first part of learning all of what you're doing right now with those spoons, how it changes. You can only really learn that if you're doing it by hand the way that you are. And that's how you really like come in touch with understanding what's going to happen to the sugar, how is it going to happen. So I'm going to mute this for a little. I'm going to mute this for a little bit so you guys don't have just the engine whirring. And when it starts changing over, we'll keep it on the video so you guys can watch it change over.
So Antonio, in comparison, like how long has that process taken you? She's stirring it with the electric mixer. You're stirring it by hand. How long is that?
I would say it's like 20 minutes of mixing that it takes to get to. It really needs. You're really waiting for it to cool off. That's what's happening. Like, and it gets thicker and thicker. So I would say like 20 minutes maybe.
Okay, that's not terrible.
It's definitely something you could do small batch, buying, maple syrup from somewhere and then just cooking it up. It'll store better. That's one thing. Maple syrup eventually will turn into alcohol. Eventually. So like it'll ferment, but not taffy or sugar will not ferment. So that's like one of the beautiful benefits of it. It'll keep forever.
So if it doesn't turn into an alcohol, won't it turn into a vinegar?
Yeah, alcohol then vinegar. Yep. Well, probably vinegar first. I think it goes to vinegar first.
Okay.
It's actually the alcohol first.
Oh, alcohol first.
It turns into vinegar. So the alcohol process goes through first, and then once it's become alcohol, it then continues the fermentation and it eats through the sugars that are the alcohol sugars into the fermentation into vinegar.
Sweet. Thank you.
It's kind of like the consistency is like a Play-Doh or dough, like if you're baking. So now I have dough balls. I didn't quite get the sugar we were. Curious to see what this little machine is gonna do.
So you guys can see it's kind of starting to change a little bit. See how it's lightening up? It's not quite as dark. And it's like actually getting all that air and it's cooling down. So that's kind of the process where you guys are at right now. That's about where I'm at right now. And you started like way before me.
Antonio, have you tried any of those the dough balls over there?
Yeah, you can watch me. What is it? What do they call that? Like Taiwanese people when they like watch somebody eat. Mukbang. Yeah. Mukbang. So yeah, this is a little dough ball.
Good stuff.
Hi.
Hi. Hey, Nicole.
Hi. All right, let's mute that back up.
So yeah, they're just. I mean, they taste good. Taste really good.
Maple candy. Like a product you didn't plan on having.
Yeah.
They put that in the delivery service. Got dough balls now.
So here's another example here in the light. This is like let's see, it's too much light. It's like a sugar boo-boo. And this is one that like turned into more of like kind of what you guys are doing. Let's see.
Yeah, let's come into this.
Excuse me, baby. Sorry. So then this sugar here didn't really granulate, and like we called it like a, it's a quote unquote mistake. The kids love mistakes at my house because that means it stays at the house and we get to eat it. So it still kind of crumbles a little bit. And this is almost more like that sugar candy texture that a lot of people really like. And see, it's got that like almost dough. It's more doughy, like what you're talking about, Antonio.
Yeah.
It's almost to that, right? So this is a later season sugar too. And that's what happens with that. Oh man, dude, start shaping that. You can make some good candies out of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, you want that in your face. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I really want to see Katie's and Jerry's because we have been struggling over here.
It's coming along. Maybe.
Yeah, this I think ours is around the same place now.
2 spoons trying to compete with that machine like John Henry.
Oh.
We broke our wooden spoon. You can see it in the background there.
Sad.
Can you show that again?
Oh no.
Too much muscle.
Yeah, too much muscle. Keep mixing. Jonathan's our slave boy.
Yeah, my arm's getting really tired holding the camera. Oh, just kidding. I'm not even doing that.
Yes, sir.
All right. So you'll see it's starting to change colors now a little more. And this first batch, sometimes Jerry will call it like our seed batch. And you almost need to, it almost seems like this one always takes the longest. And then once that goes, when there's actual grains of the sugar in here, the next batch is the one that turns. So yeah, I think we're right about the same spot now, both of us. You can start to see the colors changing over on there. And this is just about the part where you can't see it in as much detail on your side, but it's starting to really like get grainy right now. And oh, there it goes. There it is. There it goes.
Look at hers. Oh.
And she's there. Just like that. Yeah. He's like, no, not
Look at
just like that. I got a whole kitchen full of helpers and all we're doing is just watching and eating. I feel bad now. You got a mistake.
We're still caramel phase.
Ah, oh, sweet man. Okay, so now this is a trick that we do. On this one, Jerry can do it while this thing is running. I cannot. He's like a magician. I don't know how he does it, but I always like lose a knife. So we'll scrape these edges down. See how they're sticking on the edges here? And we'll just kind of scrape all these down to get them off so that they can get in there. He literally does this like while this thing is moving, and I have almost lost my hand doing it, so I don't even mess around with it. But you can't see what I'm doing right now, so don't tell him. All right, so I'm picking up the paste a little bit on there. Going up to the third notch.
Third notch, Jonathan. To the next level.
Next level right now. Some different freestyle techniques.
You want me to do it? Want me to pick some off of you?
He's doing good.
Maybe soon.
His glasses are about to fall
My
off.
glasses need adjustment. I keep falling off. 20 times today.
There you go. There you go.
Whoa. Skill.
Getting some style with it. I like that mixer, man. That's nice.
We actually had like we were talking about having a regular KitchenAid, and we bought the Pro instead, the professional 600 series, and that's the only reason why we haven't killed the engine, because this sucker goes through a beating every season, and we've had it, this is our 4th season with it now. So, but you'll wear an engine out on one of these things, one season.
30 minutes.
You don't,
15.
or you'll wear a roommate out one season. one trough and you'll wear your roommate engine out.
Peanut butter now.
So we're almost at 8 o'clock, guys, and been on here for a couple hours. I just wondered if there's any final questions, and then we can ask Katy and Antonio what the next steps will be for their process. So if there's any other questions before we start to wrap up, and then we can talk with each of them about what the next step is.
I mean,
For us over here, realizing how difficult it is to make sugar with what we have, I probably will go to the store and buy.
You headed out to buy a mixer tonight?
My next steps. Mixing by hand is just like quite a process.
Yeah, like looks like you would have a little bit longer to go.
Yeah.
And then Katy, what's your next steps after you take it out of that bowl? What is that now, the sugar, or is there another step in that process?
Yeah, so here, I'll pause this so y'all can hear me better. So it'll keep going for a while. It's pretty warm still, so we'll let this go for a little bit longer. And then we'll come over here. We'll put it in this little sifter here, and I'll sift it through, just because that's the way we like having our sugar, is that granulated stuff. It's real fancy. Not everybody does it this way. So this is just the way that we do it, so that we actually can package it and sell it a little, and it looks real nice, looks really good out there. So that'll be our next steps, and that's kind of it. This thing probably has maybe 5 more minutes on it, give or take, not even. And then we're all ready to go.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, why don't we do just like a little round robin with folks who are still on the call, and just I, for one, thank you, Antonio and Katy and Jerry, because I learned a lot just at this stage. I learned a lot out collecting also. So thank you for your expertise. Let's just go around and say, if you want to say some parting words to Katy, and then to Katy and Antonio, and then by time we're done with that, she'll probably be sifting it. Nicole's not there. Samantha, I see your face. Do you have any final words and things you learned? Or I know you're a forester, so maybe this is not new information for you.
Nope, just Chimigwaj, Katy and Jerry and Antonio, and keep up the good work, and see you all soon, hopefully, when it's safe.
Yes.
Nice. Gary, do you have any final words about the project, about the sugar, things you learned?
I'm just super. I'm grateful, super impressed with both operations, with the machines and the roommate powering through, trying as hard as he can to get to that third notch. Just so I appreciate all the folks sharing today and all the effort. And we're looking forward to having Jerry and Katy join us for more gatherings like this, to share some of their perspectives and what they're doing up there on the farm and what's happening up there on the reservation, and talking to us about what things are happening down here in terms of connections to land and the things that are growing, and our relationship with it and our relationship with each other. So appreciate y'all.
Nice. Nicole, I'm gonna just put you on the spot. Do you have any questions for Jerry, Katy, or Antonio, or any reflections on what you learned today?
Well, I had a really good time. I was simultaneously gardening and harvesting strawberries and whatnot. It was also making me think of when I was out there. I went out there for a brief minute, and that was a good time too. Super, super cold, but it was really nice to see Jerry and everybody else.
Well, it wasn't nice to see me, Nicole.
Were you there? I don't remember.
I saw you walking in. I think I was walking in, you were walking out with the kids. No, I'm just playing with you. Yeah. Nice.
I did also get some birch bark yesterday because the storm downed a tree. So I'm looking forward to trying to figure out how to make a simple basket with it.
Nice. I love that. I think that Sugar Bush was like one of the last events before COVID. I was just looking back at those pictures like, I remember hanging out with people and not worrying about anything. Mohammed, I still see you on the screen. I see you playing with your youth back there. Do you have any reflections, anything you want to say to Jerry and Antonio before we take off? You're on mute, Muhammad.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was getting some technical problems right here. What I want to say is thank you, of course. Miigwech is invaluable information. It's amazing. It was just so relaxing just to watch the process too, and to hear the words and everything. It was lovely. That's all I have to say. It was really great. Thank you so much.
I totally agree. Like,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I see you're sifting now. Do you want to talk about what you're doing, Katie? You're on mute if you do.
Okay. Yeah, so this is how we do the sifting process for us here. You can see in here, this is what the sugar after it's been sifted, see how nice and light and fluffy it is. These granules, see they'll still actually break apart. And so that's why we kind of sift them so we can make sure we can get those broken apart. I always try to steal them and put them in my house sugar because I love having my sugar here. But of course we want to like sift it through so we have enough to share with other people. We do a lot of our gifting with our sugar, and we make sure a lot of people will ask us so that they can add these to their gift bundles and things like that. So we've gotten lots and lots of requests and lots of folks who just want good sugar to eat. And so that's kind of the entire process that it takes us. This is about, right here, 4 ladles of syrup. So just under a quart, I think, worth of syrup will get us about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds, depending on how nicely this sifts through. Almost 2 pounds worth of actual sugar that we can bag up and process.
For context, how much of the sap is that, would you estimate?
Oh, Jamie. Okay, so I can only do the math this way down. So it's like 40 gallons of sap to 1 gallon of syrup. This bad boy holds just about 1 gallon of syrup when I'm warming it up, and we can probably do, I'm trying to think how many like pans we go through, maybe 8 or so. I don't know. Jerry does all this math for me. This is my job. I just do this. And I file, and then I put it in bags and I stamp it and say, here you go, I made your sugar. So, I maybe we can get some of that more. I know he knows the math a lot better than I do, but I know about a quart's worth of that syrup is we get just about 2 pounds of sugar out of that.
Gotcha. And a quart is like, okay, my math is all off. How many gallons? I
4
guess.
quarts in a gallon.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah. So
thank you, Sam.
8 pounds of sugar for a gallon. So 40 gallons of sap goes down to 8 pounds of sugar.
That's about right. Yeah. So this is about as much as we'll get in this pan here. So I can get about 4 good ladles in here, and that's about what I can get in there that we get down to about 2 gallons. So yeah, that sounds about right, Sam. I feel like
Your kids could have done that way faster than we did, but they would have been like, no, Mom, this is what we do in math class.
Yeah, I'm a social scientist. We don't take
we don't do math.
We keep going. That's math in Ojibwe.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Katie. Antonio, are there any final words as you're still mixing?
For me, I think this has been a really wonderful collaboration. I think one of the cool histories we wanted to uplift with the Detroit Sugar Bush is the relationship between abolitionists and sugar buyers in the North and sugar makers. So that's like Anishinaabe people in the North. A lot of the sugar that was made historically came from cane sugar. And my grandpa was actually a sharecropper in Puerto Rico that did cane sugar. So for me, switching over to the abolitionist side, during the time of slavery, folks wanted to get away from cane sugar because obviously its relationship with slavery and chattel slavery. And they started buying sugar from Anishinaabe people up north. And I think it's a really cool collaboration to see a bunch of like African-American and urban Native people in the city collaborating with Northern Native people to make our own sugar, reconnect with the land. you know, this is all part of broader work that myself, Tafira, and a bunch of other folks are a part of, Shakira, with a group called Black to the Land. And you can follow us at Black to the Land Coalition on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. Same thing, same sort of work I do with the National Wildlife Federation is just taking kids outdoors and then connecting with nature. And more broadly with like kind of collaborations around Indigenous Peoples Day is another collaboration example that we do here in Detroit. We do this thing called the Indigenous and African Peoples Solidarity Feast. So this is all part of a broader body of work that is really at heart decolonial, at heart like solidarity between African, Indigenous people, urban natives, and folks on the res. I'm actually going to be going over to Gun Lake Reservation tonight to go hang out with some folks and learn some skills. And it's all about making those connections between tribal country and Detroit and building a stronger, more resilient community.
I think my heart is tingling right now. Thank you. You said a mouthful. Chris, you have any final thoughts on what we learned today?
Oh man, my brain is everywhere right now. I just want to thank Antonio for spearheading the Sugar Bush project down here. You know, your curiosity has turned into something that I just see growing and growing. And you know, as we further this project, we will be doing more outreach. You know, we're trying to get up to the reservation, as well as getting some of the youth from the reservation down here to Detroit. COVID has kind of slowed that process down, but it's still going to happen in the future. Anybody interested in, you know, being a part of that, you know, please reach out and touch us. You know, the more work we can, you know, put in as we bridge these gaps and, you know, do cross-referencing and learning with, you know, these cultures, you know, the better. So yes, this has just been, you know, totally awesome. So thank you, Jerry and Katy, as well, for, you know, helping give us some guidance down here and, you know, opening yourselves up to us, and just look forward to building and growing and, you know, becoming part of the tribe.
Coming up to Kiwana Bay and hanging out in your sugar bush.
And in between.
Well, those are the people whose cameras are on. If there's anybody who has final thoughts or final questions that decided to keep their camera off, I was just kind of going through the faces that I saw. But there's a number of us on the call. You know, I'll just give a silent moment for folks who might want to join us, whose camera was off. I'm thinking really specifically too about Miss Shakira, who was one of the folks from last year doing the sugar bushing with Antonio that he shouted out. We saw her in the clip. If you had thoughts, Shakira, feel free to chime in. If not, you're definitely welcome to stay quiet. Hey! I got you out.
Yeah, I was gonna give some gratitude, Miigwech, to Katy and Jerry. Thank you, everyone. I've been in and out. Thank you, Antonio. What's up? Sorry I couldn't join you there. So the storm knocked my power out last night, and so I'm like in the midst of trying to keep my phone charged and preserve my refrigerated and frozen things. So I missed some things. I'm hoping it was recorded, but the bits and pieces that I did catch were so phenomenal. Thank you. I really love the visuals and the comparisons, and I was taking notes as I could on my hand as I'm like running around. So I really look forward to doing this again next season with all of you, and I hope we can continue to do more exchanges together to really uplift that history that Antonio has shared. So peace and love, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks for jumping on. I'll just leave a little space for anyone else who may have questions or reflections as you see Katy is sifted her last, is mixing her last of her syrup there. And Antonio is still on the first batch. This is like cook-off, maple sugar cook-off right now. If anybody whose camera is not on would like to say anything, feel free to jump in. And then I also just want to acknowledge the time that we're in right now. There's and on top of a global pandemic, we're all thinking about race relations in the city, in the country and in the nation. I mean, in the world actually. And this is just perfect timing for historically oppressed people to kind of join forces with folks who are interested in this work, and and folks from an abolitionist mindset as well. I am just honored to be a part of this work. We're at 8 o'clock, and I don't want to keep folks longer, but I also don't want to rush folks. So if folks have questions or thoughts, feel free to chime in, and if not, feel free to start to take off. And I'll let Chris kind of close us out and close the meeting out.
All right, wow. Close the meeting out. You know, it's funny, I almost want to ping pong this to you, Garrett, and let you close it out. You're such a great closer. Hey, Garrett, I'm gonna pass it to you, man. Are you there?
Well, sometimes the best way to close it is just leave it with how it was just said, you know. I really appreciate T for you facilitating and stitching us together a lot throughout this. And I think just for any last words, you know, seeing Antonio and Katy still working in their kitchens, if they want to say anything, but last thing I'll say is thank you, everybody, and look forward to the next time that we're together like this.
Yeah, I guess I'll say next year we're gonna definitely be quite a bit more intentional. We want to include, you know, do some more public workshops and build this, you know, community up. I think one of the best ways to build community is in nature together, working together, sweating together, you know, over the fire, you know, over buckets, whatever it is. So I really look forward to building with a lot of you folks out in the Sugar Bush, but there's other projects, you know, that we have the Decolonial Solidarity Feast coming up. Hopefully we're gonna be ripping down a Columbus statue in the next couple of days, so maybe we'll see you in the streets for that. But there's a lot of really beautiful work connecting these communities and interweaving the urban natives and Black folks with tribal communities. And we had actually planned to do quite a bit more of that with the Roberts Woods Grant Foundation money that Sierra Club brought in to support this. We're actually looking to bring down Native youth from Glyphwick, which is the Great Lakes Indigenous Tribal Fishery something.
Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission.
Yes. We're looking to bring those youth from that community down to Detroit. We're going to send some Detroit youth from my program up to that community until the COVID sort of stuff happened. The COVID stuff really happened quite a bit in the middle of the Sugar Bush. We actually had like kind of shut down operations as soon as the COVID struck. So, you know, we really look forward to kind of getting everybody together in person and you know, building this up. And I have a ton of sap or a ton of syrup to give to the urban native community and the folks who work the Sugar Bush. So get at me. I look forward to seeing you all in person.
Thanks so much. And then I think this is a 3-part series, right? So we're planning 2 more of these webinars with Katy and Jerry. So stay tuned. Katy, I saw you starting to speak. Did you want to say something before we go?
Yeah, give me good name. Just wanted to thank everybody for like listening and sharing. I know it was a lot of us sharing and then y'all listening. But again, we're kind of stuck on these platforms. The whole intention was like what everyone was saying, we wanted to bring everybody together to learn this together and share together, sweat together. It's really, really important. Anyone who wants to come up and come do this like all day, every day, come on up, like come work with us, because it's just me and my kids out there and Jerry, and so we're always welcoming and hoping that people will come and want to learn. We got a couple folks who are already planning on coming up here, spending time up this summer, and you know, it was to just bring that love for each other back, right? Like miso oge is like that's how we're gonna heal from all of these old hurts, all of these pains. There ain't nothing that little bit of sugar, sweat, and hard work can do with you. So I just want to thank all of you for sharing with us and for spending time here, and I hope this was helpful. And we're looking forward to keeping these connections going and spending more time together. Yeah, Migwe Chapake. Thank you.
Boy, we're not together, but I feel the love. It was good to meet you guys, and that's it. It was recorded, Shakira, so stay tuned for the recording and stay tuned for other webinars with Jerry and Katy and Detroit Outdoors and Southwest Grows. Take care.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, everybody. Antonio, Katy, Jerry, everyone.
Thank you.